Hey guys, what's going on today? Joey McKenzie here from joeymckenzie.tech. Today wanted to talk about something that I've been having a lot of fun with in the side projects I've been working on, and that is integrating Tailwind with Rust WASM applications. And specifically when I say Rust WASM, I'm talking about applications that I write in Rust that compile down to WASM. With again, my choice in terms of web frameworks or WASM web frameworks in Rust is Vue, but there are other frameworks out there. I'm not an expert in any of those frameworks. I've really only been using Vue. Coming from React, Vue has felt pretty much like a one-to-one knowledge transfer, which is really cool, especially in the functional component space that they're doing, the authors are doing. So let's jump right in. So what we'll be doing today is taking a look at Tailwind and how we might bring Tailwind into a Rust WASM application. So I'm sure we've probably all heard about Tailwind. You know, there's tons of component frameworks out there that are kind of specific to whatever language or ecosystem you may be working in. So Material UI, Angular Material, you have all the Chakra UI, which is specific to React. I like Tailwind because it is simply just CSS, and I might get some difference of opinions with some people, but I actually enjoy CSS, or I enjoy writing my CSS as inline style. So I have or inline classes, I should say. So I have no problem with Tailwind. I know there's some people that don't really like, having a million classes inside of some of your HTML, but I don't mind it. I find it very easy to work with, especially with all the React and Next stuff I do. I use Tailwind for all of that. And so kind of jumping into Rust and Vue and WASM, I wanted to kind of bring that same experience over that I've been having with Tailwind, and it turns out I'm able to do that, and it's really easy, nothing too difficult. We kind of get the same Tailwind tool chain tools that we use in the NPM world. We can use that also in Rust. So let's go ahead and get started here. We'll use a few. We won't talk about Vue just quite yet, but we do want to get started with a new Rust application here. So got a clear console. I'm just going to go ahead and spin up a brand new Rust application. It's not really going to do anything right after that. So let's go ahead and cargo new. This will be a binary application. We'll call this our Tailwind WASM sandbox. Okay. So let's go ahead and open that. So I'll open its code, Tailwind, WASM. All right, so let's get this guy opened here. Bring him over. Okay, so this loads, and I've got nothing special here. All I have is just a plain old Rust application. So if I run this Rust application, a cargo run, I'm just going to get hello world out in the console, and that's obviously because I haven't done anything yet. So I want to add some WASM capability to this, and all I mean by that is I want to toss in some web stuff in here. I want to throw in an HTML file, I want to throw in a CSS file, I want that to compile, I want to just write the Rust that ultimately might get spit out or generated in my distributed bundle that eventually gets served to the browser. That's ultimately what we want to do here. So when we say WASM, or when we say Rust WASM, or any of those sort of words in trifecta there, what I'm talking about is writing Rust code that ultimately spits out stuff on a web page. That's kind of the main goal here. So let's go ahead, and we're going to bring in a tool here that I've been using, and that is Trunk. And Trunk is, I like to think of it as like a sort of bundler for Rust WASM applications. It feels very much like a Webpack-y, roll-up type tool chain for Rust that we can kind of rely on to pack things up for us, pack our Rust applications up, and bring them to the web for us. I'm not a Trunk expert by any means. I've been using Trunk to just write a couple of projects that I'm working on, and so it's kind of just been my tool of choice. There are some other things you can do specifically, or more specific to you, I should say, that can help you write WASM applications, but for our purposes here, Trunk is going to do just fine. So getting started with trunk. So they go through and tell you, okay, you need our binaries. So if you don't have trunk already, I already have it installed. You'll want to go ahead and install. I just installed via Cargo. I do some stuff for a front-end application that I'm writing right now in Rust, and so I actually use this version of installing it because I have to use a GitHub action that installs trunk and does a release build and all this stuff and releases it to Netlify. So I'm going to go ahead and just use this Cargo install lock trunk here. I already have this installed. So if I jump over to, let's see, where are we? Well, so if I go trunk help, I should get a lot of stuff in here. So it's just going to say, all right, what do you want to do? Okay. So what I'm going to grab here to get started, bare minimum, all I need, and again, this is my application code. So this will be specific to the WASM framework that we decide to choose. For our purposes here, we'll be using U. So what we need, first and foremost, is let's just grab some basic old, and actually let's go ahead and head over to U because we will be using U. So I'm just going to grab the most basic HTML I can possibly grab. And let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to drop in, and next to my project manifest, I'm going to add, an index HTML file, and this is just the most plain, simple form of front-end code I could possibly write. And let's go ahead and let's just drop an H1 tag in here, and let's just say hello from WASM. Okay, so if I go and run a trunk serve, and we're going to talk about why this actually works in just a second. So we see a few things happen here. And I notice in our directory workspace, I have this dist folder now. And so by default, there are some settings with trunk that ship with the tool if you don't specify anything outside of that configuration. One, it assumes that you're going to be serving on port 8080. Two, it assumes that the sort of the initial page that you want to serve to the browser is going to be adjacent to your manifest file. So again, this is where I put my index.html. It's next to the manifest file in here. If I was in a workspace, this wouldn't necessarily be the case, and I'm dealing with this now. I have a Cargo workspace that I have a bunch of Rust projects in, a bunch of Rust crates in, and one of those Rust crates is a U application, and so just kind of relying on the defaults doesn't really work for us. We also need to tap into trunk into one of the build cycles, so that way we can sort of help compile our CSS and all that type of stuff. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go ahead and, before we get too deep into adding U into our application, let's go ahead and let's just get started with Tailwind. That way we can just make sure our Tailwind is at least working with trunk, so trunk is bundling up our Tailwind and serving it with this index page that I'm adding here. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go back to Tailwind here. So I'm going to jump into the Get Started docs, and I'm just going to rely on Tailwind CSS. You can use PostCSS with you. Again, it's not needed. We just want kind of the most simple sort of gets everything set up here for us. So we do need to be in, so we do need package.json. I need some npm packages here. So I'm going to go ahead and clear my console. Let's just go ahead and npm init. I'm just going to run through all the defaults. I don't really care, so I'll clear that. Okay, so this just gives me a default, everything basic package.json file. I really don't need pretty much any of this. I won't worry about deleting it just yet, but so let's go ahead and npm install save dev tailwind CSS. Okay, so that's going to add a package dependency here for me in the form of Tailwind. Once this is installed, let's go ahead and add a Tailwind config file. And again, I'm assuming that if you're watching this, you may have used Tailwind before in other frameworks. So as we all know, Tailwind does ship the flagship Tailwind config file. This is where you would put sort of all the stuff that all the styles you want purged from production builds. If you had any custom themes or fonts that you would want overlaid, plugins. So I use Tailwind UI. I use a lot of the plugins like the typography plugin and whatnot. So I don't really need any of this. The only thing I really want, that we want to showcase here, is the content. So this content array is going to say, okay, what files do you want me to look at, and look for styles, because any styles that I don't see inside of those files, I'm going to go ahead and purge from the build. So, if I had a blue button, or I wanted the button to appear blue, but I didn't tell Tailwind that, it's going to be inside of this index.html file, Tailwind's not going to know that there's a style inside of my index.html file that has, background blue 500, and it's going to go ahead and purge that style from the ultimate bundle or the ultimate CSS bundle, because again, we're bundling things, we're sending them up to the web. We want our file sizes or our bundle sizes to be as small as we can get them. So I don't need every single Tailwind style to my shipped application. I only want the Tailwind styles that I'm using, because there's a million different Tailwind styles. That's the beauty about Tailwind. It's as customizable as your imagination can get. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell it to ignore my index.html file from purging. So that means any style that you see in my index.html file, I want that to ship with my output CSS. Okay, so once that's out of the way, let's go ahead and create a Tailwind source file here. So I'm going to go ahead and add directory. Let's call that styles. I'll call this Tailwind CSS. I could also just put this in a Tailwind CSS file. Sometimes I might have overriding CSS, or there's brand specific CSS, so you might want to group all those together. So I'm just going to plop that into a Tailwind CSS file here inside of my styles folder. Now, so let's look at our sort of distributed output here. If I were to serve, so if I say trunk serve, okay, so that's all great. It's going to serve the content out of this dist folder. And again, this is the same for just about every modern framework that you're going to be using, right? If you're developing inside VS Code, if I'm in a Vue application or a React application or an Angular application, more often than not, I'm going to see this dist folder, and that is what our application server is serving up to the browser. So if I jump into this browser here and I say localhost 8080, okay, hello from WASM, and I can see that this actually is so if I go over here, let's just take a look at the doc that gets served up. So it's serving from my local host, right? Serving out of the root directory, which is this. Cool. So I know that this is coming from my server or my local server. I know this is a web page. I've got WASM hooked up. I'm using trunk. Cool. This is all great, but I want Tailwind to kind of pretty this thing up for me a little bit. So let's go ahead and add Tailwind. Now, ultimately what we're going to need is we're going to need to bundle Tailwind into our distributed output. So in order for us to do that, we have a few different ways. We're actually going to rely on using the Tailwind CSS CLI. So if I go ahead, let's see if I can get this to close. Can't get that to close. Okay. So if I were to just go ahead and, let's just say do this. I'm just going to go ahead and drop this in here. Whoops. Let's clear that. All right, clear that. I'm going to go ahead and just copy this over. I don't need watch because I'm not going to be changing any of my styles. So what I'm telling the Tailwind CSS or the Tailwind CLI here is I want it to run the Tailwind CSS utility CLI. That's going to intake some CSS with the Tailwind directives here, and that's going to output all, or it's going to read my Tailwind file, my Tailwind config file, understand all the configuration in there, and then it's going to output what we'll see in just a second is the sort of generated CSS file that's going to contain all the styles that we'll use inside of our index.html file. Okay, so if I were to run this, we want this to look at the styles directory, and this is going to intake the Tailwind CSS. And now in a minute, we'll kind of talk about trunk build hooks and why we don't want to do this manually every time, especially if we're changing and adding styles, because again, Tailwind's going to purge things that it doesn't find in your source files. So if I were to run this, let's call this app.css. Okay, so this is great. All right, so ultimately this is what I would want, is something like this. right? So if I were to go into my index file here, and so I'm thinking in the context of my distributed output. So if I wanted to link this file, this would be this would be a style sheet. Whoops, style sheet. And the href to this would be app.css. Now, if I run trunk serve again, so trunk's going to clear out the dist directory, right? Okay, so this isn't going to work for our case because we need Tailwind to be shipped with our output stuff here. Okay, well, how are we going to do this? Well, it just so happens that we get to tap into trunk build hooks. And so what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and grab the trunk. I'm just going to go ahead and grab what an example trunk config file looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to name this trunk.toml. Okay, so I'm not too worried about the contents of this stuff just yet. We can ignore 90% of this. And you'll see this is kind of like the most default. These are pretty much all the default settings, right? This is saying, okay, so what is my target source file to look at? So when I do the build processing, I can get your build output, all that type of stuff. I'm telling it to look at my index.html file, put it into the dist folder. Public URL is that. I have serve on localhost and default port 8080 and a bunch of other stuff that I'm not really worried about here. Now, what I do want to take a look at, and again, we can bypass all this proxy stuff, not important for here. What we're interested in are these build hooks. And if I run trunk serve now, so we'll see a bunch of stuff happen here. And so like if I take a look at right here in the middle, I see the spawn hooked ls command arguments. So where's that coming from? Well, this looks like just some distributed output, right? This, or not distributed output, this just looks like a list of files inside my current directory. Well, it's because it is, because we're running this post build CSS here, right? Or we're running this post build hook where it's just going to ls or list all the files and directories that it's currently in. So I kind of want to tap into this, right? So if I were to change, let's come into here and let's just add a button. So I were to say button, click me, right? Okay, so I can go ahead and save that. Trunk is watching this index.html file, and it's going to run that same build hook over and over again. Okay, so this is something that we can tap into because what we want to do now, and again, this is so we can kind of keep our Tailwind styles from getting purged and kind of have our Tailwind continually compile as we run our application is, we want to include the compilation process of taking our source Tailwind file, our tailwind.css here that has all of our Tailwind components, and we want to output this into what the actual app.css file is that contains all the Tailwind utility classes. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that utility there where I was taking this stuff here. And so I want to take that, let's come over here. So I want to take that and plop that into my build hook. So as I'm building, I want to run a quick shell command, and all that shell command is going to do is run npx tailwind. The input file is going to be styles. We're going to call this Tailwind CSS, the output folder. So here I have dist, but I may change that in the future. I'm not sure when. So luckily for us, trunk ships with a few token environment variables. So you can think of these as like, if you've worked in Azure DevOps pipelines or, GitHub Actions, I have sort of reserved, or Vercel for that matter too. So I have reserved environment variables during the build process. And so this is sort of the same idea. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this in here, and we're going to say output. Well, let's actually change this to app.css. And so we're going to say, okay, on build, go ahead and do some stuff. I don't care about listing the files after every build. I'm not really worried about that. And see, like you'll see this, it's just going to echo hello trunk. And so if I were to see this in here, it's probably initially hello trunk, right? So I'm not too concerned about these pre-build and post-build hooks. The only ones I'm really concerned about is the sort of while building hook. Okay, so let's go ahead and rerun this now. So I'll do a trunk save. Okay, so it's going to go ahead and do some stuff. Okay, cool. So this does look like no utility classes were found in your source file. If I look at my app.css, right, I've got a bunch of stuff here. And this mostly has to do with typography things. So if I were to take a look at my output now, okay, well, I've got a different font. So that tells me that my Tailwind is working. Okay, well, this isn't Tailwind just yet. I'm going to go ahead and head to Tailwind UI. So full disclosure, I pay for Tailwind UI. I think it's an incredible product, especially for quick development and whatnot. Will make your life a whole heck of a lot easier, being able to just kind of quickly drop in, grab a component, and you're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab a basic old button here. Most of these you have to pay for. They do give a few just regular old style or regular old components for free. Okay, so I've got a button. Don't want to get my license revoked there. I'm going to head over to my index file and I'm going to replace this button with that. And okay, let's see what happens. So if I jump on over to my open now, okay, well, I've got a Tailwind style button. And if I look at the example here, that is the Tailwind button. Okay, well, this is all great, but what I'm really concerned about, let's get rid of that guy there. Okay, so this is all great, but let's see if our, what I mentioned earlier about Tailwind purging styles. If I actually take a look at the output CSS here and I were to look at blue, whoops, let's see, what is it? Indigo, is that the color we have here? Indigo. Okay, so I have the indigo stuff. So these are all the styles that I'm currently using. Now, I don't have any green, right? And again, this is because Tailwind is reading my source files, seeing that I'm not using a large amount of the utility files that are included, and it's purging those from the distributed output bundle. Okay, but what if I wanted a green button? Well, let's drop into our actual index HTML here. And I'm just going to go ahead and change this to green. Okay, so if I save, trunk is again going to run that build hook. It's going to tell Tailwind, compile the output. And now if I jump into my distributed app.css file here and I look for green, I've got a green button. If I were to look for indigo 600, which the original one was, I don't have that anymore. Because Tailwind sees, okay, well, you're not using background indigo 600, so you don't need that in your output file. And so now my Tailwind file, or my CSS files, 600 lines long. So definitely pretty small. I can get away with a lot here. So this will be a pretty small bundle size. And actually, let's take a look at that. If I look at the CSS that gets served, hopefully, let's see, let's empty the cache and reload. Whoops. Okay. Let's see. All right, not worry about it. Okay, cool. All right, so I've got just WASM working here. I don't have any actual Rust code yet. So this is where we'll bring in you. And again, this isn't really talk about you. It's more just how we might integrate Tailwind into a Rust WASM application. And for our purposes here, my sort of choice of WASM framework is U. Again, coming from Rust, U is pretty much a one-to-one transfer in terms of idiomatic React, or I should say coming from React, it's pretty much a one-to-one knowledge transfer. A lot of the things that you do normally in React, all the state hooks, function hooks, all that type of good stuff, it's in U, and it feels very much just like writing React. But with Rust. So we get all the native Rust benefits that go along with that. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump into this build a sample app here. And so this is going to say, hey, do some, startup stuff. One thing I am going to need is let's actually bring in you as a project dependency. So I'll stop my build here. Let's clear that out. Okay, so I'll give Rust Analyzer a second here to just kind of bring in these package dependencies and whatnot. This is going to update my workspace. And once that's done, we kind of have just a bit of boilerplate. And by boilerplate, I mean quite literally just a couple of lines. I'm just going to drop in here and add an app.rs file. And kind of keeping that same vein of React where I might have like a main.tsx file and an app.tsx file where, main.tsx is just kind of my startup, mount to the DOM, all that type of stuff. And my app.tsx might have like my routers and all that kind of like very high level stuff, layouts, high level layouts, all that good stuff. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And again, this isn't a discussion. This isn't a video about you. We're just simply kind of using you as sort of proof of concept that we can get Tailwind inside of Rust WASM applications. So let's go ahead and spin up just a simple U component. So luckily I have some stuff. Whoops, got to include that. So let's go back to Rust here. Whoops, Rust Analyzer. Come to save the day here. So let's see. I'm gonna drop it here, save that. Wait for Rust Analyzer to catch up. This might be a minute. Hopefully not. It's got a lot going on in the background. Okay. We won't wait for that. So I'm just going to go in here because it's still doing a bunch of processing in the background. Clippy's doing a bunch of stuff. I'm going to go ahead and just bring this in. So let's be mod app. Go ahead and save that, hopefully. Okay, cool. All right, so looks like I'm all good now. I'm going to jump over to here and I'm going to write I have a quick code snippet called a U functional component. So this is something I created, just a VS Code user snippet. And so this is just going to scaffold out a really, really quick functional U component for me. I'm just going to call this app. Oops, app. I'll go ahead and lowercase that guy. For our purpose here, we're not really going to do a whole lot. We don't need props. We don't need a whole lot of this stuff as of right now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right. Cool. So we'll jump over here. So I got mod app. Okay. So let's spin up our U application now. And so, with Rust, what we'll do, let's see, we got an error over here. Let's see, what do we have? Syntax error, bang, loading. I think this is maybe Clippy not catching up. Let's see. There we go. Okay. All right. So to start up my U application, I'll tap into U. I'll start app, and I'm going to start my app with a specific component, and in this case, this will be app. All right. So I'm just telling you that, hey, I want you to start the application, and this is my mounting component, is app.rs here, and app.rs is just a simple output component that is just going to simply spit out hello world. Okay, so I'm going to save this snippet off here because I don't need it right now. I'm going to go ahead and put this to the side. All right. Okay. So let me save all my files, make sure I'm all good to go here. So if I jump into here, let's just say hello from you. And now if I trunk serve, all right. So my build hooks are going to run, all my good stuff's going to happen. It's going to say, hey, I don't detect any source files for me to purge from. And so let's actually change that now, because now we are going to be putting CSS inside of Rust, literal Rust files. And so I want Tailwind to ignore the Rust files that have Tailwind utility classes in them. So I'm just going to tell Tailwind here, hey, if you see anything in the source directory, and let's just give it a glob pattern because I can do a bunch of different stuff. I'm just going to go ahead and say star.rs. If you see anything like that, don't worry about it. Looks like I am getting an error here. Let's see, hopefully that won't prevent us. Okay. Oh, I think this is just differing WASM versions. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Yeah, I think I accidentally spun this up with a different version of WASM. That's okay. So let's see if we can get this running here. So I still have button text. Okay, so that means it's still running. Looks like an older build here. I'm actually going to go ahead and let's see. Okay, found our issue here. Didn't want to waste too much time on it. Ultimately, what happened was I had a different version of WASM bindgen. And again, this is kind of what we include. WASM bindgen has a bunch of cool, nice WASM utilities, especially like if we wanted to make like data fetching calls. There's all different things we can do to attach to the browser window. And again, WASM gives us the ability to tap into JavaScript APIs and native browser APIs. So ultimately what happened, this is a long-winded way of saying, I had a different version in my trunk file than what I actually had installed on my local computer. So just simply updating that WASM version seemed to fix everything. Going through the fixes obviously didn't work because I was already on those versions. And so I'm using trunk as my tool of choice. And again, that's not required, just a tool that we can use. Cool. So we've got everything fixed here. So we go through and run our application. So I ran my trunk serve again, and here we'll get a fresh window here. Sure, I can't cancel my processes. Okay, so let's run a trunk serve. All right. And so again, here's our build hook that's running, and it's compiling our Tailwind, outputting a bunch of CSS, yada, yada, yada. And then again, we get this, no utility classes detected. Well, because I don't have any utility classes right now. I'm telling it to take a look at my index file, and I'm also telling my Tailwind config file, look for any Rust file that you see underneath the source directory. Well, obviously I don't have any Tailwind classes here, but if I head over to localhost 8080, I do see hello from you. And again, that's kind of where we left off. And again, I can, change this. I can say hello from WASM you. If I go ahead and save that, it's going to rerun, and we'll see that appear in the browser here. Hopefully when my build goes through. Oops, not yet. Okay, so let's see. Looks like we have some cargo Clippy running in the background. Might tell Clippy to stop running for now. Okay, so let's see. Looks like we had something that our build server didn't like there. So let's see, we'll get that to run again. I'm going to tell Clippy to stop running right now so I can stop file locking myself. Okay, that should be fine. All right. Okay, so then if I remove this, let's see, hopefully that was just a one weird time error. Okay, yep, looks like we had sort of file locking going on there. So, okay, let's go ahead and add some Tailwind classes though. So I can treat you, again, I can just slap classes onto my HTML elements here. So I'm just gonna grab a class and let's just take the most basic one we can. Let's make this text 3XL. Okay. And so now I have a Tailwind class. We shouldn't be getting this message of, hey, you don't have any Tailwind utilities, because now I do have Tailwind utilities. I'm saying, hey, make this a 3XL button. Cool. Okay. Well, font sizes are fun, but let's just go ahead and drop our button back in there. And so I'll go ahead and I'll add this. One of the things that, I'm sure this exists, but can't find anywhere. I would really love a prettier for you applications, but I think that might be a ways off here. If I had any gripe with you, that's it. I don't think Rust format is just quite there yet to format U code, or to tap into at least Rust format. So I'm going to say, again, click me. All right. And again, this is just how we bind in just U convention here. So I go ahead and I save that off, and I've got a green button that says click me, hover, highlight. And again, all the same stuff applies. So, if I want the hover color to be maybe just a darker green, I'll just call this green 700. And so now if I save, rerun all my build processes, I hover, and I get just a darker green. Cool. Okay, I think we're going to call it there. So that was a fun one. Again, we went over integrating Tailwind inside of a Rust WASM application, and then also integrating inside of a U application. So lots of cool capabilities here, lots of cool things that I know I'm going to be using in the future. Again, I think the next video we'll be doing will be deploying Rust WASM applications out to Netlify or possibly Vercel, but Netlify is pretty easy. I like it. I'm pretty partial to it. So I think we will call it there. And until next time, I will see you guys later.